Hey everyone, welcome back to Breakthrough Innovation, where we dive deep into the real stories behind the ideas, experiments, and leadership that shape the future. Today's guest has spent the last decade leading transformation at one of the world's most influential open source companies, Red Hat. As global CIO, Jim Palermo has a rare vantage point into how IT can become a business enabler, not just a service function. He's not only reimagined infrastructure through hybrid cloud and FinOps, but also helped launch an AI center of excellence that's turning innovation into a repeatable impact. Jim's career spans from deep technical roots to global leadership, and he brings a no nonsense view of how to scale experimentation, embrace disruption, and still keep humans at the center of tech. Jim, I'm excited to have this conversation. I've always been a closet fan of Red Hat. Welcome to Breakthrough Innovation.
Well, thanks, JL. Great to be with you both.
We're glad to have you. So maybe to start off, you've led a lot of transformation across cloud, AI, FinOps, enterprise platforms, all these big things. How are you defining innovation in IT, and how have you seen that change over the past 5 years?
Yeah, wow. Let me start by I try to keep things relatively simple with when we talk about innovation, because innovation can mean a lot of things.
Yeah.
It could be technical innovation, it could be cultural innovation, it could be process innovation, but what I think about is value differentiation, right? So if you're innovating, you're ultimately trying to create some value differentiation in what you're doing and what it does for business outcomes and business objectives, right? Because that's ultimately why we're here. So when I think about innovation, I think about, what are the quantifiable, qualitative measures that show value differentiation in simple terms. And I think to the other aspect of the question, wow, IT has changed so much since I've gotten involved in it, many years ago, we'll just say. And, I think originally, technology, you could only get technology through IT organizations, right? And we don't even need to say how ubiquitous technology is, even the most edgy stuff like AI. I mean, everybody's using AI every day, right? So it's not the technology, right, that creates differentiation in IT. It's the business enablement and through technology. And so I think that has really changed dramatically over time. And so I think that is continuing to change. And, technology organizations, I think, have got to become much, much more curious from a business perspective, right? Understanding the business they're in and understanding where the acumen of understanding the business plays such a huge role in being able to tie then how to use technology to enable the outcomes that need to happen, right? So you just, the days of just providing technology are long gone. So
No, I like that perspective. We like to talk about this concept of principles, systems, and tools. And it's amazing the number of times you see organizations run by their tools. It's kind of like the tail wagging the dog, so to speak.
no doubt.
And I love that perspective of we kind of have to flip that mindset, which maybe, I mean, it's the perfect place to run into our second question, which is what is that perfect example or that one example where that cultural or mindset shift was the impact rather than the technology itself?
Yeah, and certainly at Red Hat, we have our share of cultural wars that have gone on over the period of time of its existence, all ultimately leading to positive change. I'll harken back to one of the very first big initiatives that I was involved in at Red Hat. I think most folks know that, Red Hat's entire software development model is based on open source, right? With that, there's a tremendous amount of energy and passion around open source rules all, right? So everybody wants to use open source capabilities, regardless of whether it's been commoditized or not, or there's value differentiation in using
Yeah, yeah.
something else, right? So, in my early days, I was running a shared services organization, and we had a collection of open source tools, to do things like this, email, calendar, content systems. I mean, you name it. We had an open source tool for it, multiple open source tools based on what organization you were in. And, I had this kind of, you know, a profound idea. Well, why don't we think about leveraging something like Google Workspace, right? Where everything's integrated and everybody's running the same thing and everybody can message each other. I
Novel
think, yeah,
idea.
yeah, yeah. Wow. But, honestly, and certainly everybody got that, right? But the reality is that, there was this palpable sense that we were committing some sort of treason against open source, right? By giving in to the man, right? And it was an interesting conversation because what it really taught me was there are certain feelings and cultural identity that exists that you have to navigate effectively in order for you to actually achieve, you know, technological enablement of value differentiation, right? And so one of the things I learned early on at Red Hat was in talking to the corporate leadership team about this idea was that, we really needed to bring the company along with us, right? And really appreciate the different pockets of resistance or excitement around something like that. And honestly, one of the things I learned in that we did, not just in that effort, but in future efforts, was we really tried to create a a open decision making framework, right? Where and this is an interesting concept because it's not that everybody gets to weigh in on the decision, but everyone's voice gets to be heard about how you made the decision. Right? So we spent a lot of time working with a lot of folks, particularly in an engineering organization and folks that are more passionate around the open source idea that didn't want their tools taken away or wanted to continue to do what they were doing and really, really listen to them about, how we could affect change in their organization, right? So you take
Right.
the detractors, you bring them into your change management structure, and then you start to position things a certain way where they may not like the decision, but they understand and appreciate and respect it and recognize that you have a job to do and will fall in, right? And so,
Yeah.
and that was not an easy thing, but it's a classic case of the technology was not the hard part. It was the change management of getting people to embrace it and adopt it and let it sing for them, right? And figure out how they were going to use it within their own organizations to be more effective. So anyway, that's a great example of cultural change being kind of the bigger challenge, the bigger mountain.
And I like how people were thinking of the cultural values in terms of the technology. And then from your story, it feels like you helped them shift their mindset and realize, oh, the cultural value is how do we make decisions? And it doesn't actually have to be embodied in the technology. It has to be embodied in our mindset.
The mindset, that's a
Yeah.
great point, and that's exactly it. In fact, a lot of, we were talking earlier, like, Jim Whitehurst, who was our CEO at the time, wrote a book about the open organizations, very interesting book, and as I would say, it was probably us at our best. But what I would say is that he talks a lot about the open decision framework and the concept of changing mindsets, as you just
Yeah.
mentioned, right? And I think that's a really important lesson to learn. And frankly, that's an extreme case, but every organization, every enterprise has their cultural biases, has their sort of, their idiosyncrasies that you have to manage and you have to embrace relative to affecting change in that organization. It's something we don't talk a lot about as technologists, but it's maybe the most important thing that you consider as you start to try to create that change.
When it's interesting, we tend to talk about getting buy-in as this organizational wide thing, like we need buy-in. And the reality is it's actually a very individual thing.
It is.
And I think that's where a lot of organizations fall down because a one size fits all approach to buy-in or motivation or anything like that is not a human approach, right? That's a business approach. And I think maybe that's the thing we're kind of hitting on here is if you want to have a more human-centered approach to change management, start looking at individual buy-in, individual motivation, because like you said, there's that identity level. And if you aren't tying the chain to that person's identity, they're probably not going to change.
They're not. They're not. It's a really great way of describing it at even a higher level, and that's exactly what we're talking about.
No, I
Yeah.
love that. I feel like there's another question just kind of at the tip of my tongue, and I'm not sure, quite sure what it should be, but I want to dig into that idea of cultural change. The example you had was a really good one. And that sounds like that led to people using the tool or making better decisions. Would you
In
say
in
in
what
that instance, was the technology more or less valuable than the decision-making process?
honestly, if I was to look at that, that was a seminal moment in Red Hat history when we deployed the Google Workspace. I mean, it seems like a very trivial, not trivial, but it's not rocket science, right?
Right.
I mean, to be honest. But honestly, what it did was it allowed us to establish the framework for how we were going to apply change going forward. And we sort of memorialized this concept of open decision framework, right? And so what that did was for every significant change that we did, and not just in technology, it could be an HR decision or marketing decision, it could be a company decision, right? We definitely applied those principles and that framework to every major decision that we needed to make, going forward from that point. So basically, it was sort of a microcosm of okay, we had a lot of trial and tribulation. We found some things that worked and didn't work, and then how do we take the lessons from that and apply that going forward to every big decision that we need to make? And I mean, think through COVID, like as things came out of COVID, everybody everybody was very comfortable. They had created new norms in terms of how they were going to work. Some folks moved out into the middle of nowhere, and then now we're back, and everybody's like, well, let's get everybody back to the office, right? So how do you manage that, right? People have made new, and I think people are still working through it. So don't get me wrong. It's not like everybody's figured it out. But the point is that it's not just technology change, right? It can be any type of change, right? That you have to instill in order for you to move forward as an organization to be effective in the market, right? So even with, workplace technology or workplace strategy, right? Are we going to build an office every place we have people, or are we going to take advantage of shared spaces? And so anyway, there's a
So, Jim, how do you take that mindset, that ethos that you're describing? And I'd like you to talk a little bit about your quarter of experimentation. So, how does
yeah.
how does
Okay.
that mindset translate into the quarter of experimentation?
Okay, so that's a really good topic. And I say this really started about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, as we started, and obviously Red Hat and being part of an IBM company, with all the things that they've done with Watson and where they're trying to go with AI. We started to try to have a lot of influence on that, and we wanted to bring kind of open source thinking into the concept of how do we think about our products differently relative to AI. Our CEO at the time was just incredibly gung ho. I mean, I'll never forget the town hall meeting when he said AI is going to change the world, and everybody's kind of like, oh, okay, and everybody's got to get involved, and this was his way of sort of trying to get everybody rallied around the idea of AI. And then at this point, I think ChatGPT had started to come out, and and people were starting to play around with it in their everyday life. But basically, he had this call to action, right? But it was so broad. And when you do that in a technology company, everybody feels like they're behind already and they're going to go off and do stuff, right? And so we really had to, the role that I felt like we had to play back to like, we're not to be the ones that are the only ones innovating in AI in the company, right? So recognizing that what we didn't have any control of the chaos, right? That we knew was going to be forthcoming. So how do you manage all this? Because he effectively created the call to action and got everybody thinking about, okay, how could this improve our business process, and how could it improve our product, and how could we do marketing differently and sales differently, and that's all great. But generally, what happens is with technology companies, everybody goes off and does something in their own vacuum, and then you've lost control of the situation. And of course, my team was responsible for information security as well as business systems and our classic I&O infrastructure. So, my information security leader was just kind of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do here? So what we did is we immediately grabbed, kind of a community of people, legal, HR, product teams, said, look, we need to start to create some guardrails around this, right? So that's where it started. We started to create guardrails collectively, and we provided them out to the company to say, hey, look, you don't have to go off and necessarily reinvent the wheel, right? What we're going to do is we're going to create a center of excellence that provides you insight on how you can experiment, right? And so what we did is we had some environments that we had set up so that folks, when they bring an idea, of where they thought there could be value at a production level, not for their own benefit, right? But for the organization, the team's perspective, where can we do that? And kind of started to create an inventory of tools or experiments that had been tried so that folks didn't reinvent the wheel. So it was a very lightweight, quote unquote, bureaucracy that they ran through, but we kind of automated it. We like, hey, what's your idea? And then we would point people in the right direction. Hey, you might want to talk to X or Y, something similar, and maybe you guys can combine ideas and bring something back, and then we can kind of point you where there's an opportunity, a sandbox to do that. So That's where IT, I felt like, created some value differentiation. It wasn't because we built something really great yet. It was because we created guardrails and sanity in a very chaotic environment. But what we did internally was, as you might imagine, we had lots of great ideas. And so what I did is I started to say, well, how do we can't work on all of this at the same time, right? We've got compliance to worry about, business systems transformation, trends, right? But what I thought about is like, why don't we just create sort of a quarterly review of innovation, right, in the AI space? And so folks had to bring their ideas, prior to the quarter beginning, and we had a kind of group of people from around the organization that would vet these ideas, and we'd pick one, sometimes two, depending on the nature of how complex it was, and we would invest in that. Right. And so we would give folks resources. We would make sure that we prioritize that experiment over the course, and it had to be done in, no more than 6 to 8 weeks. And then they had to be able to read out kind of what the results were and how they could see this playing out into a more production scale, right? What would be the cost? What would be the benefit? How would we measure that? Right. And so that's what we did for an entire year. And so each quarter we'd pick one or two, we'd do it, and it may fail. And the ones we picked sometimes failed. And fail meaning that it wasn't ready for prime time. A lot of them led to the next experiment and the next experiment. Before you knew it, we had some really, really cool things going on in the support space, both on the internal customer side, and then we shared that with the external Red Hat customer side, customer support side. So we started to really innovate on the support side to take advantage of our very significant knowledge base and remove human touch and really improve the entire experience. And then from an operations perspective, the automation we did was just incredible.
Mm.
IBM's expectations of us were, compliance was a real big deal for them. And so we were not prepared for that, honestly. And so we had to think about how do we work through ensuring that we can show evidence that we're following through on all these internal controls, right? So not something that we ever really worried about before we obviously had to be concerned about it. We had audits, but my point
Right.
being is that the rigor that was expected of us was significant.
Yeah.
So anyway, point being is that another way to sort of harness the energy, right? And like, and we can't invest in everything. So let's try things that we think have the best chance of success. Let's learn from them and let's continue to iterate on them, kind
I
of the
love that.
concept of the whole product idea. But yeah.
So maybe like as a takeaway for our listeners, what's the biggest lesson from your quarter of experimentation that you think it's valuable to share with upcoming leaders?
I think it's really important that you get a cross section of folks that can help ask the right questions, evaluate something from multiple vectors, right? It's easy to go get the smartest tech guy or the best product manager and say, okay, you're the one that's going to make that decision, or silo it to different groups within IT. I would say get a cross section of folks that you feel are going to challenge, are going to question, but are also going to potentially see the benefit, right, beyond even the experiment itself, right? And so definitely use that kind of concept of community to sort of vet and prioritize what you want to focus on in this space. I think I've always found that's one big thing I've learned about Red Hat in my experiences at Red Hat is that the sense of community is a powerful thing, right? It certainly is in software development, but I mean, but even these kinds of things, it can be very powerful. And being okay getting some different voices in there to sort of vet the idea, I think is a very powerful thing, and it ultimately leads, I think, to more value down the road. So that would probably be the biggest thing I took from it.
Spoken like a true open source guy. No, Jim, this has been fantastic. As we're wrapping up, where is the best place for listeners to connect with you and collaborate?
Well, I appreciate that, Jill. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the best place is just through LinkedIn. I'm Jim Palermo on LinkedIn. I love to hear from people. I'm doing a lot of independent, consulting and advising right now as I think about what my next chapter is going to be. But yeah, no, that's a great place to reach me. A lot of people have found me already, but I love talking to folks and vetting and thinking about ideas and just different ways of thinking about different problems that are out there. So yeah, that's the best way to reach me.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for the time and all the insights. For everyone else who's joined us all the way to the end, hopefully you found a lot of value here. If you are looking at how you can spin up your own type of innovation or experimentation initiative, let us hear about it. Tell us about it in the comments. We always love to hear about those sorts of things. And if you know anyone who's working on something like that or has an interest in Red Hat, introduce them to Jim through this episode and share the wealth of knowledge. And then lastly, before you leave, don't hesitate to really leave a rating or a review for us. That helps us a lot. And then again, Jim, thank you so much for your time. And everyone else, thank you as well. And we'll see you all next time on Breakthrough Innovation.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for the time.
Jim.